This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Hi, everyone. It's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by the free One for the Week email newsletter. One for the Week delivers one high-impact communication resource to inboxes each week that you can immediately apply to take your communication skills to the next level. Want one piece of communication and persuasion insight you can put to use right away to get your voice heard, to more effectively lead your team, or to advance your organization's priorities? Join the more than 800 subscribers of the One for the Week newsletter by going to whensciencespeaks.com/one for the week. That's whensciencespeaks.com/one for the week. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Tory Waber to the show today. Tory is the president of Victoria Waber Coaching and Consulting, where she loves empowering her clients to find freedom in their lives. Tory's clients have left unsatisfying jobs, landed new jobs, gotten promoted, leveled up their leadership skills while along the way, architecting clear career paths with actionable next steps, learning how to wrangle their inner critics, creating time for life outside of work, and taking plunges that they've fascinated on for years. Tory earned 3 degrees from Harvard University and worked at Facebook and Google before making the choice to relocate and start her own business in Mexico. Welcome to the show, Tory. It's great to have you here. I'm a big fan of yours, and I would like listeners first to just get a sense of your background, where you grew up, how you first got interested in science before we start to delve into what you're doing now.
Sure. Happy to, Mark, and happy to be here. It's really great to chat with you. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, San Francisco Bay Area. And it's funny, I was thinking about how I got interested in science. And I recall that as a fourth grader, we had to draw a picture of what we wanted to be. And I drew a picture of myself as a chemist. I think at that point, chemistry was probably my favorite thing. I did well in high school chemistry, but when I got to college, organic chemistry changed that vision. I'll just put it that way.
For so many people, it just is orgo.
Yeah. And my mind just did not rotate the molecules that way. And I took a course that was probably designed as a filtered course, and it filtered me out. And fortunately, the spring of my freshman year in college, I was in a course, I lotteried into a course that was very popular on evolutionary biology, taught by who would later be my dissertation advisor, my graduate advisor, taught by that professor. And so because I took that my freshman year, because I lucked into that course, it charted my entire career direction from that freshman year course and rerouted it from chemistry to biology. So I think I was probably interested in science from childhood, but in college really solidified that evolutionary biology was the way I wanted to go.
I really did love bio, and my last science class was AP Bio with Mrs. Gorfine at Framingham North High School, and I really loved that class. Let me ask you this. There aren't a lot of fourth graders who even know what chemistry is in the sort of the academic sense. Did you have any scientists in your family or friends, or how did you draw that picture? I don't think I knew how to draw a chemist when I was in fourth grade.
Right? No, and I think I had some beakers and various exciting things. I had no idea how I got there. I do know I was interested in science by high school because what was interesting, I organized a program as a high schooler where I went and taught science to kids in local neighborhoods who might not like science. And so we did all the fun things like building volcanoes and all sorts of color changing things. So even from there, the passion of sharing science with folks who might not otherwise get exposed to it was really exciting for me. But I can't say how I got there. And it's funny, even now running my own business, the sort of entrepreneurial scientific method comes so naturally to me. So in many ways, I feel like the scientific approach is just one that comes naturally, and I can't recall how I got there. So maybe it's just something I was born with.
It was
destined
by the stars.
Fun.
And it's also, you just made a point that I want to get to too, is the scientific method as applied to entrepreneurship and how you're finding that is really valuable. Listeners who are in academia right now might not think that kind of academic training is really useful for entrepreneurship, but clearly you are one example of how it actually is great training ground. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. I'd like you to talk a little bit about evolutionary biology. I have to say it's something that I have been fascinated by. And I know listeners, we probably have folks, evolutionary biologists who are listening, others who are just really interested. You decided early on to focus on biology, and give us a sense of the work that you did for your PhD, and then just some other, maybe some cool things that you encountered along the way as an evolutionary biologist.
Oh, yeah. So many cool things. I think what drew me to the area that freshman year was learning more about these species of apes who are so closely related to humans genetically and share all these parallels, but have these really interesting, different visions of what our evolutionary past might have been like. So, the two species I'm talking about here, chimpanzees and bonobos, equally genetically related to humans, and yet, if you've heard anything about chimpanzees, you might know that they're aggressive. They have this capacity for warfare. And bonobos are the make love, not war ape, right? We'll put it that way to don't forget it. And so there's this striking difference between these two species that gives us this question of, hey, where did we come from as humans? How did we develop these aggressive and these pacific tendencies? And how can these different species tell us more about our deep roots and evolutionary past? And so learning about those species and then ultimately getting to go work with both species during my undergraduate and graduate work allowed me this really fascinating picture of human history or prehistory or evolutionary history that was really fascinating and that I just loved having a chance to dig into as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student.
Yeah, so cool. It seems like we got like a blend of the bonobo and the chimpanzee
Yeah,
at
that's
times.
roughly it. That's
Some
definitely are my thesis.
as you go through life, you run into people probably who are a little bit more chimpanzee than bonobo, and then the other way around too.
For one of the press coverings for one of my papers that came out during my graduate time, I published papers, and one of them was, "Are you more of a chimpanzee or a bonobo? Like your hormones will tell the story." And as an academic, I was mortified that the press was simplifying my work in that way. But I think that allows people to connect, really to say, okay, there are these aspects in these species that are very similar to what you see in humans. And so by better understanding them, we can better understand ourselves. So that was a lot of fun getting to do that work.
Yes, absolutely. So cool. So you went on to work as a data scientist at Facebook after you got your PhD at Harvard. And many listeners are interested in data science. So that's why I want to return to how getting your PhD was actually good training for your work in data science.
Absolutely. And I'll caveat this by saying I got a job in data science about 10 years ago. And the field has progressed a lot since then in terms of its popularity, in terms of what the needs and the expectations are. But at the time when I got a job in data science, these firms were looking for, and in particular, big tech firms, were looking for folks who could wrangle with the data that they were collecting and help make sense of that data to inform decisions. And so, fortunately, with my graduate training, I'd been making sense of data, taking these data sets and conveying them into insights. I'd been doing that for years. I had a good sense of statistics and probability. I could conduct a sound experimental design and design that thoroughly, making sure that you don't bias things one way or another. And those skill sets were hugely valuable to folks who might have technical training, but might not have that same data oriented skill set. Now, data science roles can skew a lot more towards putting models in production, machine learning areas like that. But those skills I had of almost data wrangling that I had been using in my PhD, albeit with different data sets of different size and different content. But those skills and that ability to work with data fearlessly and then convey it clearly to folks who weren't data savvy, that really came in handy. And I don't think I would have had that same skill set had I not done a PhD.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I want to follow up on that because that last piece, when you're talking about conveying it clearly, first of all, being able to distill and pull insights from really large data sets and also communicate the information in a way that is accessible, that's clear, that's engaging for non-data scientists, perhaps maybe others who aren't scientists at all, is really one of the big themes of when science speaks. So I'm glad that I should get a little bell when someone says something like that, because we have to pursue this a little bit more, Tori. As you were doing that, as you were deciphering and then describing in accessible ways, were there mechanisms or techniques or strategies that you would have in your toolbox that you would then deploy in these kind of situations, these kind of meetings, or even in written form?
Yeah, I think for me, what I grew in the longer I spent in tech was understanding who the customer was for my data. So the stakeholder, right? So maybe I was influencing a product manager or an engineer. Maybe I was going to a VP with my insights. Starting to get to know what those folks were interested in, what they might know versus not know, how to tell a story and how to draft a good executive summary slide for any of them, right? 3 to 4 bullet points where I would share the key findings, then have the graphs and supplemental materials that would support it. Both knowing those customers and then almost knowing to put the results first. I think if you look at journals like Science and Nature, they do this. They put the results first and they put the methods at the end. But most other academics will start by telling you the methods before they get to the results. And with executives, you just have to switch that. They don't care about your methods, they care about the conclusion. So it's good to have your methods in supplemental slides so that you can tell folks how you got to your conclusion. But focusing on that conclusion and how you convey that story to different stakeholders, I think I only learned over a few years worth of practice.
Yeah, I think the good news is it can be taught and learned. It's a focus of my online class and the workshops. And as you point out really well, Tori, it's not like a linear kind of communication, because it's like you're putting the results before you put the backing and the supporting information. But people won't hang on through the methods and listen if you're going to start with that, even though that might make logical sense. And telling the punchline and then the setup for the joke seems backwards. But for this kind of situation, when you're dealing with non scientists, that's the way you've got to go. So, yeah, just a really great example of how you calibrated your message because you knew what your audience really cared about, which would be different from a VP versus an engineer versus someone else. You really had a good understanding of who the customer was for that and shaped your story accordingly. Just wonderful. Thank you for providing that specific illustration. Tell us what it was like to work at Facebook when you were there as a person right out of academia and then going right to one of the titans of tech. What was it like? What were some of the things that struck you?
Yeah. So I was there from 2013 to 2015 when the company grew from roughly 5,000 to 10,000 people. So functioning like a big startup at that stage still, probably. And so I think for me, there were a number of culture shocks I had to navigate, some pleasant, some more difficult. The pleasant ones were the food, the gym, the on site amenities. I remember I read an article, the title was Every Professor Needs a Wife. And of course, that has some gendered components to it, but it's basically every professor needs someone to manage the household, right? And the things that go into supporting the academic work. And when I got to Facebook, I was like, wow, Facebook is my wife. It's doing my laundry, it's preparing my food. And so this like notion that Facebook would take care of these household needs that in times before would be taken care of by a stay-at-home spouse. Spectacular that they were doing those things to allow me more freedom to work. Of course, that meant then that you needed to work and actually deliver quite a bit. And the pace was a shock. The number of stakeholders and people I needed to manage relationships with was a shock. The precision of the analyses, very different from academic precision. That was a shock. And so there were a lot of tough areas to navigate as a PhD. But I feel so fortunate that I did that at Facebook, where again, the company at that time was growing, had a lot of great opportunities for data to actually enter into the conversation. And so it was a lot of fun to get to do that learning there at that time.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you went up to Google. It's like maybe going from the Red Sox to the Yankees. I guess as a Red Sox fan and as a Boston guy, I hate to admit that, but things have changed also over time. But in any case, again, another top tier company. What was that like? What was it like during that transition and then the time that you spent at Google?
It's funny, Google is a very different company from Facebook culturally. So folks might look at them on the outside and say, hey, fairly similar business model, big internet companies. But the culture, both because I was there at a time where the company was more mature, much larger in terms of employee headcount, the sort of startup like atmosphere of not shared at Google. I don't think that's been there at Google since the early 2000s, probably. And so it was adjusting to that sort of way of work at a big company. So I'll just give one example. One thing that happens at these big companies, and I've now started to hear it from my colleagues at Facebook now, 10 years later, they're getting there. But a big company, your job is about alignment. And alignment means making sure people all through the management chain, upwards and sideways, are on the same page about what the priorities are and how they're getting done. And even as a quantitative person, a lot of your work is about making sure you understand what do all these people want. You bring them on the same page about what you're going to deliver. You check that what you're going to deliver is what they think they want before you do it, then you deliver it, then you communicate out what you've delivered. And so communicating about the work you're doing is probably about 70% of the job, where only about 30% of it is doing the job itself. And that's a big shift, but I think it's true of Google and any extremely large company because the coordination burden becomes so massive. That's the
Yeah.
other one. Communication is huge. It's less communication about the maybe data or analysis and more communication about what's the question we want to answer on what timeline with what inputs.
So helpful and not obvious from looking at that from the outside. Alignment is definitely a buzzword that I've heard, and you really provided such a good example and an understanding of it for folks who may not be familiar with it. And now you have a very exciting business. You help tech leaders capitalize on their unique skills, help them propel their careers to the next level. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I can speak to that alignment now as a one person company. My alignment conversations are much easier. I don't have to get buy in from anyone other than me. And so I get to spend more time doing the work. And that work is growing tech leaders, growing their skills, allowing them to better know themselves, know their strengths and their wants, and put those into practice in their work. And how I got to this was that I was a people manager at the end of my tenure at Google. And what I recognized is that I didn't get as much time to grow my people as I wanted. Realistically, as a people manager, I could only spend about 20% of my time growing my people. I had to spend another 50% managing sideways and upwards, and then maybe another 20 actually getting work done. And so I felt like that was an area that I enjoyed and had strengths in, but that I didn't get to put enough of my time towards. And so by starting my own business where my focus is growing people and allowing them to grow their careers through building their skills, building their self-awareness, building their confidence and taking actions on behalf of their career. By doing that, I get to propel them to success in a way that I didn't have as much bandwidth for as a people manager as I would have liked. And so because I'm not navigating that organizational setting, I can do that much more clearly while also knowing the setting that folks are in. Part of, I think, my value prop when I work with folks in tech is that I know the environment they're in. And so I don't have to be upskilled around the buzzwords and the circumstances and the dynamics of a matrixed organization. So I can jump right in with them, but I don't have a horse, right, in that race. I'm no longer in their political environment. And so they don't need to be as careful with me as they might with a peer or a mentor, where there might be ramifications. They can be fully honest with me, and I can actually be a champion for them, sitting on the outside, but with knowledge of the inside.
First of all, tell us the name of the company and also the website. Of course, we'll have links in the show notes that accompany the episode.
Yeah. My company is Victoria Wobber Coaching and Consulting. Very straightforward. And website is victoriawobber.com. I've kept things easy there in terms of the paperwork for DBAs and all those things. But
Yes.
yeah, for me, it's the opportunity to get to coach and consult folks and help them grow their careers. So that's what I'm passionate about.
And I can tell, and I always want to work with people who are passionate about what they do. As you were describing it, it was reminding me of how you were describing kind of your interactions with VPs and engineers, and you knew what they cared about. You were kind of in their shoes to a certain extent. And that helped you in your presentations and your communications with those different stakeholder groups. And now you've been in the shoes of your clients. And so you understand their native language and what is important to them, and drawing that out is really a focus of figuring out, what do I really care about? What do I really need? Tell us, like, what types of clients you work with, or if people are listening and thinking, I want to work with Tory, or maybe I should check it out. Maybe I should go over and see what the specifics are. If you could give folks a sense of what kind of services you offer, and just like different types of profiles of folks who you work with, at least right now.
Yeah. And it's often mid-career professionals who have hit a wall. And so that means either a figurative wall where they feel like they have progressed as far as they can in their career where they are, or a physical wall where many folks will be taken out of work by back pain or other physical stressors, which I usually interpret as, okay, their body's trying to tell them something about the way they're working, the approach they're taking. And so they have basically hit that wall and they know they need to make a change. And that change can be a couple of things. Some folks, it's a new career path. So I work with Ph.Ds. to move into the tech industry because academics as a field of work has its own set of challenges. Those are folks who have hit a wall with academia who are ready to move on. Sometimes within tech, folks hit a wall where they have hit a soft skill gap, and where someone working with them on that soft skill gap and actually saying, hey, you want to get here? The thing you're missing is X. Let's work on that. That's something that I help folks with. So for example, say you're a senior individual contributor in tech and you want to be a people manager. You might want it, but if you don't have the skills in managing up the chain, you're not going to be able to deliver on that career goal. And so actually working on that skill set, identifying what you want and how to get there, will allow you to sidestep that wall instead of just hitting your head against it. So whether it's making a change, right? In PhD world, it's often, okay, I need to do something new. What do I want to do? How do I get there? Or I'm in an environment that I want to stay in, but I feel like I've maxed out where I am. What do I want to do next? How do I get there? Those questions are the ones I help folks answer, but the exact way we answer them differs client to client. That's part of what's so fun for me in this work, is that I'll bring the questions and the frameworks, but each person has their own personalized strengths, values, wants. And so we get to custom design what their future looks like based on those and based on bringing the questions and the sounding board to help them navigate those challenges.
Wonderful. Such a fulfilling type of work that you're doing, Tori, and you're perfectly positioned in all sorts of dimensions to do that and to really add value and help your clients. Thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's a lot of fun. I feel very fortunate.
Wonderful. And thanks for being on the show. Listeners, thanks for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.